Today's session is fortunately being run by Colin O'Leary from O'Leary and Associates, and Colin's got a long history in business strategy and business visioning, and we'll get into that in just a couple of moments. We are always blessed to have a fantastic board and a fantastic economic development advisory task force here at the NSBIA, as well as working with some of our YKA strong partners. And so we want to acknowledge that, reopening a business is a collaborative approach here in Kamloops, and we are all across the city working together. And what Colin's going to talk about today was going to assist us in that in many ways. So joining us on the call is the president of the NSBIA, Bryce Herman. Bryce, do you want to take a start with a couple of comments just to set some context for us?
You bet. Happy to do that. Welcome to everybody that's online so far, and I know there'll be a few more coming to join. I just wanted to thank Colin for being our second presenter in our series of Power Hour presenters, and thank Jeremy and the team at the NSBA for the hard work that has been put into initiating this drive. And I want to echo those exact same comments with Jeremy, that this is a collaborative effort. This is really about supporting the community at large. All of these sessions are recorded, and they will be posted on the site at NSBIA for a reference for the greater good of the Kamloops community and region. So thank you for that, and that's really all I have to say. Jeremy, back over to you, and we'll get Colin rolling. I'm looking forward to the session.
Perfect. Colin O'Leary is the principal of O'Leary and Associates. He spent the last 10 years working with businesses, nonprofits, public entities, and social enterprises of all sizes across all industries to overcome a variety of challenges. During this time, his work has touched thousands of businesses, and Colin is very entrepreneurial himself and is also passionate about that innovation and overcoming challenges and helping people as well. He's won numerous provincial, national, and international awards for projects, program development, and implementation. He's one of only a handful of individuals in BC that hold professional designations in economic development, and is an IAP2 certified practitioner. Colin has earned his master's in business administration, where he graduated at the top of his class from Sauder School of Business, and is currently recognized among the top 1% of business schools in the world. Please welcome Colin O'Leary to lead our session.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. So I'm going to try my video for a little bit. I'm on satellite internet, which really limits my upload speeds. So I just kind of want to be able to put a face kind of to the name for some people. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the video, and then I'm going to share my screen, and we can get into things a little bit here. And so I'm going to do that right now. So there we go. Everybody should be able to see a PowerPoint presentation now. Is that clear for everyone? Got some head nods? Okay, awesome. So I'll get going on things. So to start off, as Jeremy said, and as it's been advertised, I'm really going to focus this presentation on crisis management, response, and recovery, and kind of talking about strategy as far as it goes for a business. So the overview of the presentation is like this. We have a pile of information to cover, honestly, in a very short period of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, and I'm going to ask everybody holds off questions to the end, and then we can kind of go through some questions there. This is the overview of the presentation. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit of my own background so that you understand kind of where I'm coming from, my expertise. Then we're going to talk about, we've kind of broken up things into 3 core sections, which are immediate crisis management, crisis response, and then economic recovery. So as business owners in the community, you are probably at various stages within this. And so this is, again, a fast kind of overview, and it's going to reference a lot of the other material that's going to come later as part of this series. So first of all, this might look familiar to some of you, but this is 2017, and it was, this is the Elephant Hill wildfire. So over 12,000 square kilometers have burned by the end of 2017, and it was actually the largest total area burnt in a fire season in recorded history for the province. This was actually later outdone, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. This is what it actually looked like from the space station. It was actually visible from space. The fire was so large. And then, hold on a sec. There we go. So how do I kind of play into that? Well, really kind of where I started to kind of dip my toes into this is that I was actually hired to complete the economic impact and economic recovery work plan for the Elephant Hill wildfire in 2017. And during that time, I talked to over 400 businesses in the region that were impacted, produced this report, quantified the impact. The report got a lot of traction and actually ended up being tabled in the Cabinet of Canada, actually, when BC was going federally for looking for support, because it was so unprecedented. And a bunch of recommendations came out of that report. Many of the recommendations were implemented by various businesses and organizations, which is excellent. It's nice to see that. And one of those recommendations was actually to create a business continuity planning workbook. And Community Futures Thompson Country, who is a partner on the initial project, they came forward and they actually hired me to build this a business continuity workbook for the region, which I have done. And that's actually available through Community Futures Thompson Country. I should mention that. And I'm going to talk about it again a little bit later. And what happened was the workbook, I really try to make it extremely practical. And so some of the stuff I'm going to talk about in this presentation, I've taken it from that workbook. And the idea is I'm a business owner as well. And I really, from all my experience and talking to all those business owners impacted by the Elephant Hill wildfire, I really try to make something that was very practical and could really help businesses fare through disasters and emergencies and come out better on the other side. And what ended up happening is that workbook actually got a lot of traction as well. And I ended up actually getting in contract with Community Futures BC, which represents, I think, 36 different offices in the province, and Western Diversification. And they actually hired me to fly all over the province and talk to businesses all over the province. And so it built on my kind of experience and my interaction with business owners, and really helped me kind of solidify a lot of what are the common struggles that business owners go through a disaster situation like this. And out of that, I really now have become kind of known as a keynote and subject matter expert, really, on disaster recovery and business continuity planning. And I've been asked to speak at a lot of provincial and national conferences on this. So that's where my knowledge kind of comes from. It's really boots on the ground, talking to business owners, a lot of business owners, and being a business owner myself and seeing the impacts directly of what can happen through disaster. So there we go. So this is actually a graph from Deloitte. So Deloitte has a dashboard. It's really interesting. You can go online and you can check it out. They use data from Johns Hopkins University, and this is actually the COVID cumulative trend, and they keep this updated live. It's across Canada, so it shows all the provinces, and you can see when you look at this, really nationally, we're still trending upwards. We haven't flattened. BC is doing a little better than the rest of the country in this sense, but this gives us a good sense. It's kind of interesting of what's going on. And if we look at it, see that blue circle that's popped up. What I'm going to talk about is the immediate crisis management component first. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because probably most of you have already done these items, these things. If you hadn't, you really should do it immediately. This should be a top priority for you. And immediate crisis management, really, the ideal time for this to be happening is right in the beginning, when it started to become real. We saw that COVID was coming to Canada, and a lot of business owners should have been putting things in place pretty much immediately to deal with this. And what are those things? Well, safety, health, and security is the top thing. And so, I mean, many of you have already done this, but the idea is to make sure you've implemented recommended best practices to make sure you're keeping your staff and your customers and yourself safe right away. And it looks like that's happening all over town, which is excellent. The other thing is you really want to try to transition as much of your operations online as possible. Again, most of us have already done this. Part of that is identifying platforms to work remotely and training your teams really on how to do that. The other thing is putting an infrastructure to operate your business online. Not all of us were operating online, and so a lot of us had to scramble to kind of make those transitions. And the whole goal of this obviously is to try to keep revenue coming in. That's the big thing. And so on this note, I'll make a note that Krishna is going to be talking to everybody on May 21st. Make sure you check that webinar out. because Christian's going to be talking about online sales opportunities and can help with a lot of that kind of transitioning and keeping revenue coming in remotely. The very next thing that should happen during the immediate crisis management phase is a crisis communication plan. So a crisis communication plan is a pretty incredible tool when you have it in your toolbox. And a lot of people, when they think about a crisis communication plan, they think of this first line, which is right here. It's really strategies around communicating information about your business outwards. And you're communicating this out to your clients, to your staff, to your suppliers. And there's a bunch of different actually like target audiences you might want to communicate with. And what you can do with a crisis communication plan is you can actually figure out in advance which populations you need to communicate with. You can also figure out in advance what are the channels they prefer. So maybe your staff, they want to get phone calls from you. Maybe your customers, they're on Facebook mostly. And you can figure all this out in advance of an emergency or a crisis situation. And you can just have it on hand. If you have a made crisis communication plan, you can access it when you need to, and you don't need to figure that out on the fly. But the other part about a crisis communication plan is not just communicating information out to everyone, it's also strategies around collecting information from external sources to stay up to date on a hazard. So this is the other critical thing about communication. There's a lot of misinformation that happens around disasters and emergency situations like this, like COVID. And so one of the key things about this is you can actually identify early on what is a trusted source of information. So perhaps it's the BC Centre for Disease Control. And when you figure out these sources in advance, what you can also do is a lot of them are available on multiple platforms. So you aren't limited, you're not limited by the way that you receive the information. You just need to take the time to figure this out early and have it as your go-to source. So for example, if you really like to get your information through Facebook, well, guess what? A lot of these government organizations actually have Facebook sites. And you can stay up to date that way if that's your preferred method. Maybe you like to see emails. Maybe you like to be able to bookmark a web page and go to it frequently. But again, misinformation is a major issue, and finding correct information can be a nightmare, because what's happening right now, and that happens every time an emergency happens, is that actually the marketplace is flooded with too much information. And what I hear from business owners time and time again, and I can see it happening already with COVID, is that there's so much that sometimes people actually miss the really good nuggets of information. A, B, they feel completely overwhelmed, but C, they also sometimes get incorrect information, and that clutters the correct stuff. So those are the components of the crisis communication plan. And I want to make a comment on this note that Elise Laird of Amplify, she's going to be talking about communication in general on June 2nd. So that's another webinar in the series. So I'm not going to go into detail with this. I'm going to leave that for Elise. Make sure that you do check that out as well. So that was pretty fast. And that was really us talking about the immediate kind of crisis management. The next thing I want to talk about is crisis response, because many of you have probably, hopefully, already completed a lot of those steps early on. If you hadn't, make them a priority for your business. But the next thing, this crisis response phase, is kind of more in this area of the curve. So things are accelerating. You've dealt with the immediate things that are going on, like immediately, like got your message out, looked after safety, got everything like that looked after. The next thing through this crisis response phase is you want to do a number of different kind of fine tuning and adjustments of your business to make sure you can continue to operate. So the very first one is risk management, and it's really around your operations and supply chain. So if we really simplify this and boil it down, what we can look at is the first thing is your customers and customer management. So if you're continuing operations, hopefully you are, and you're able to do that in some capacity. And this, JP gave a great webinar on from a nonprofit angle, and this is applicable for nonprofits and for businesses. Nonprofits might not have customers, but they probably have clients, or they probably have membership, or they probably have people that they're kind of concerned about. And so a lot of this can apply. But the first thing you need to do once you get into this kind of crisis response phase is to make sure you're communicating with these people, your membership, your customers, everything along those lines. And if you're selling, you want to confirm that your planned orders that you're banking on and your cash flow and to run your business are still on track. People aren't going to be canceling those. You need to figure that out. If they're canceling them, I mean, that's probably out of your control, but you need to know about it and you're planning and when you go forward. So you need to touch base on that front with those people. And the other thing is that when you're communicating with them, you can also identify ways to pivot your business model to continue to serve your customers. So by communicating with them and figuring this out, you might identify opportunities or ways to best serve them and make it easy for them to continue to go to your business, to buy products, and continue to keep you operating. And that can look like two different kind of things. Like, first of all, you could expand services. So I've seen this locally, some really good examples of free delivery for products. So there's a location in town. It's actually it's a board game store. And what they've done is they've actually offered, if you put any orders in through text to them, they will actually drive out, as long as they get the orders before 3 o'clock at the end of their business day. The owner's hopping in his van and he's literally driving around town and hand delivering products to people. Awesome idea. The other thing is you can expand products. So a classic example on this front is look at all those businesses that have kind of pivoted, all those microbreweries, from selling beer to providing hand sanitizer. And some of this might not actually be all revenue, right? You can earn a lot of social equity in the community and goodwill in the community by providing some of these services at no additional charge or completely for free. And those hand sanitizers are a perfect example of that. So, you know, you don't need to sit there just twiddling your thumbs. You need to talk to your customers, figure out these opportunities, and jump on them. The other key thing here too is to clean up your receivables. So if you're waiting for payment from a bunch of different customers, you really should be trying to pull those in fast, because everyone's going to start tightening up their purse strings. And the key thing here is to try to get payment on as many as you can. And not only that, figure out the ones that are not going to pay. You need to know that in your own planning. The other side of this on the operations and supply chain is the supplier management. Okay, so we talk to our customers. The other component is we need to talk to our suppliers. Again, this might not be applicable for everyone, but it probably is applicable for a number of people. And you need to make sure, just like your customers, that your suppliers are on track. If you have a big order of materials and you need those materials in order to sell, you're going to be in big trouble if your customers are still willing to buy them from you, but you can't get your hands on them. So by identifying that early and being able to wrap your mind around what that looks like, you're going to be in a much stronger position moving forward. And you need to anticipate the costs are going to increase and that there's going to be delays in delivery. And you need to plan. And by knowing this, you can do that. The other key thing here is if you identify early that suppliers are not going to be able to make deliveries or are shutting down, you can identify backup, redundant suppliers. You can start looking into that now rather than kind of getting the surprise when the shipment doesn't show up. So getting on top of this early is really pretty key, because you need to make sure that you can continue, your operations can continue as much as possible. The other thing here, very similar to the customers, but on the flip side, is ask if deferred payment is an option, especially if your cash flow is tight. Chances are it might not be, but you never know, and it's worthwhile asking. The other thing here is, so that's kind of on operations and logistics, that risk management. But the other next move is really right-sizing your capacity and your resources. And again, some of you probably have already done this. If you haven't, you should definitely be looking at it. But you need to align your workforce to your demand projections. You need to look at what you're expecting is going to happen, look at the data that you have, plot it out, and figure out what kind of demand you're anticipating over this next while, and right size everything. And that could involve a leave of work for your staff, or it could involve temporary layoffs. And that HR component is not my expertise, but there's a lot of really good resources out there right now to help business owners when they're dealing with personnel. The other thing that's part of aligning your workforce is manage your operating expenditures. So I mean, most of us know this, but you look at finance, really when you're running a business, you have fixed costs, you have variable costs. Chances are your fixed costs, you're not gonna be able to change at all. The good news is that variable costs are not locked. They do vary depending usually on production or output, and or they vary because you have control over them. So what you need to do is you need to look at your expenditures and you need to identify those variable costs and you need to start to curb some of them back, save money, dial some stuff back down that you might not need. And instead of just continuing on as you are going, you probably do have quite a bit of flexibility to free up some operating cash flow. So what do those look like, variable expenses? Well, a lot of marketing is variable. It's your control. You can turn it up and down as much as you want. Some utilities. So if you are operating remotely and you have a commercial operation, you can contact BC Hydro and a few other locations and you can suspend accounts temporarily while you're operating remotely. Why are you paying for high-speed internet and phone lines in an office that nobody's at if everyone's working from home? That's not applicable to everyone, but that could be a good example. The other idea is any other kind of like operational expenses that were more optional. So for example, travel, personal development. You'd be surprised when you start digging into it, the number of things that you can dial down without repercussions. And I should make a comment that Mario from BDO is going to be talking probably about topics like this, and I'm sure covering even more than this on May 19th, and really kind of looking at financial management strategies. So make sure you check out Mario. He's going to do the deep dive on this part. The next component here is cash flow management. So I have a lot of experience working with entrepreneurs and with businesses, and my key thing is cash flow is king. From everything I've seen out there supporting businesses, that is the lifeblood effectively of a business. A lot of people get wrapped up with like an income statement or they get wrapped up with a balance sheet. Cash flow is king. Cash is what keeps you alive. I've seen a lot of businesses that have been very profitable, but they go through a short period of time that is a cash crunch and they don't have enough working capital or operating capital in order to be able to survive that little crunch period. And it can be as short as 2 months and they fold, they close their doors and they implode. And it's really painful to see that, especially if like at the end of the year, net in the end of the year, they could be extremely profitable, making millions of dollars. But the reality of it is if you don't have money to pay your staff and you don't have money to pay your suppliers for 2 to 3 months and your landlord, some of those people, they don't like that happening for very long. And that's the cash crunch. So one key thing in crisis response you need to be doing is you need to take everything you've done up to this date. So that's looking at your customers, collecting that input, looking at your pivots, talking to your suppliers, looking at increased costs and delays, looking at your operations and figuring out what kind of what expenditures you can kind of dial back. You need to take all that data and you really need to make yourself a cash flow projection. What do things look like for you in COVID? What are you looking at? You can't rely on the data you had before or what it's always been like. This is a totally new scenario. You need to have a reasonable idea of what this is going to look like. And so building a cash flow doesn't have to be complicated. A lot of times it can stress people out, but really if you break down a cash flow, it's very, very simple. It's cash inflows at the top, which for a lot of businesses, honestly, is just sales. It might be a single line. That's it. Next, you're going to have your cash outflows below that, which are expenses. It's good practice to break out your variable costs and your fixed costs there. You don't have to do that. You can just literally do a laundry list of like, what are you paying for right now? And then lastly, it's your net cash position. You take your inflow minus your outflow and you got your net cash. Do that monthly. Don't look at a year. Don't look at a week. A year is too broad. A week is getting way too detailed. Look at it monthly. Make realistic projections for yourself of where you think you're going to be at. You can also, if you like this stuff and you get into it, you can do scenarios for yourself. Let's do like a worst case scenario, a probably what's going to happen scenario, and then a best case scenario. Look at that, see what it looks like. And the next thing you need to do is you need to look at focusing on your working capital management. And what that means is making sure you have operating capital to keep the door open and that you don't go through a cash crunch. And so by having your projected cash flow, you're going to be able to identify what realistically that's going to look like. And make sure you take that worst case scenario and you look at that. And you can right now, there are loans available that are supposed to be there for basically bridge financing or operating cash. You might need a little bit of support to get you through a crunch that's coming up, and you need to figure that out. And on that note, Blair Gray from Community Futures, which is an excellent organization in town that does lending, he's doing a presentation on May 26th, and he's going to be talking about loans. And they actually provide loans, and it would be very worthwhile kind of checking it out if you think at all you could be finding yourself, pardon me, in a situation like this. So that's kind of the, the crisis sort of management portion. And the next portion I'm going to talk about is not necessarily happen when you look at this curve from Deloitte, but I'm going to be talking, and I've done a projection of economic recovery, which is really when things, it's the end of like things climbing up. You've already done your crisis response, and now you're moving into what's next and planning and strategy on that front. And so I've done this dashed purple line. So it could be also while things are flattening out, and it could be while things are starting to trend downwards, which again, with this graph from Deloitte has not yet happened, but you can progress to economic recovery as soon as you finish those other phases. So if you finish those phases early, don't wait, get right into this next phase. So here is a big thing, and it sounds crazy, but I can tell you, I've seen this time and time again, is you need to capitalize on support programming that's out there. So in most crisis sort of situations, many support programs and grants go underutilized. And not a lot of people realize this. I was going to actually pull some data from some of the stuff I have kicking around. I didn't do that, but I can tell you that it is shocking how few people really take advantage of a lot of the support programs that are out there. And I've asked people, why? Why are you not taking a grant from the Red Cross? Or why are you not taking bridge financing at 0% interest? And the reality of it is that business owners are just too overwhelmed by the sheer information that's out there. So they don't see it. It gets lost in the noise, or they are too distracted by day-to-day operations to make the time to take advantage of them, of these kind of support programs. So it's crazy because there is support out there, and you really need to take the time to take advantage of it. It's going to be a small window of opportunity. It's going to be over before you know it. And so you've got to, as soon as something becomes available, make sure you're on it and you're filling out the paperwork. It is worth it. You don't have to capture everything. You need to look at focusing on the key things that are out there right now, like the employee wage subsidy, like the $40,000 loan with $10,000 of it being forgivable at 0% interest. If you qualify for those items, you should really be taking the steps to take advantage of them. And the big thing here I want to talk about is you really also should be leveraging the community support. So we talk about support programming. This webinar series is an excellent example of this. And it's kudos to you guys for participating in this and for hopefully continuing to participate in the future sessions, because you're going to learn a lot of information fairly quickly, and it's going to save you time and energy. And there's a lot of great organizations that are out there. For example, the North Shore Business Improvement Association, obviously you're all familiar with that, you're part of this, but there's the Chamber, Community Futures, Venture Kamloops, YK Strong is an organization out there, and they're all examples of groups which are trying to provide simplified information and support is really what they're trying to do for you to save you sifting through all the noise that's out there. You will have a chance to go to them, and they've got it easy. They've made it easy for you. They often offer actually little workshops, like again, this webinar is a good example, that can kind of cover or simplify a lot of that information noise that's out there. So make sure that you are taking advantage of this stuff. Engage these organizations and make time to apply. It is just so painful to see this stuff go uncaptured. And on that note, I'm going to mention Acacia, who's with the Chamber. So Acacia's going to be speaking on May 28th, and she's going to be talking about kind of networking remotely through this. And if we look at, you know, talking to your customers and talking to your suppliers and also capitalizing on support programming, the Chamber is an awesome resource for this. So here is the next piece. And I feel like this quote is just going to get like flogged to death through this experience, but you need to identify and seize opportunities is what you really need to be doing. So Winston Churchill's classic quote, never let a good crisis go to waste. And it's so true. So a lot of people are thinking doom and gloom with COVID, right? And they're thinking about everything's getting shut down and it's going to be hard. And who's going to survive? And some businesses aren't going to survive. And it's going to be a tough slog. But you also need to put on kind of your optimism hat, and you need to realize that there's actually huge opportunities in the shifting marketplace. Not all businesses are actually losing money. Some have increased their revenue tenfold or more. And so you need to look around. This is an opportunity for you too. You need to look around and identify these emerging market opportunities that your business is ideally suited for and capitalize on them. Don't wait. Once you have the immediate kind of crisis response and crisis like recovery sort of covered, you need to start looking around and saying, how can I take advantage of what's happening right now? How can I help my business to thrive and flourish? And some really good examples of that are, I mean, a lot of tech companies, obviously, it's fairly easy for them. They've launched a pile of products. Those things are going bonkers right now. But it goes beyond that. It doesn't have to be technology. Another really good example I would point to locally is that Munden Ventures is operating right now a little program because they realized early on that a lot of truck drivers that are out there have no options to go to for food because everything was closed. And so they actually started a program. It's not for profit, but they started a little program where they got some food trucks out there and made the truckers aware of them. And that thing has absolutely exploded. It's actually now they're talking about launching it nationally, but that's a perfect example of somebody identifying a need and taking advantage of it. So take some time after you have the initial stuff looked after. You need to look around and see if there's some way that you can actually strengthen your business, maybe even increase revenue as we go through it. There we go. And this is the key kind of thing with economic recovery when we really look at it, is you need to learn, adapt, and become stronger through all of this. So as you're working through things and you're discovering weaknesses in your business, and you're discovering things or your nonprofit, and you're discovering things that are really working well for you, you need to record that. You need to mark that down, make notes about it, but what worked and what didn't work, and what would you do differently? Because the reality of it is that sure, right now we're basically dealing with a pandemic, but these business interruptions can come in all sorts of different forms. So we are approaching the wildfire season. There's flooding is already happening around the province. So things like this are happening all of the time. And our businesses and our nonprofits, we're going to be facing these things with increasing frequency as we go forward. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. And so you really do need to make plans so that you fare through stuff like this way better. You're not as impacted. And really, this information is the foundation of a business continuity plan. And a business continuity plan is a plan that really just focuses on the ability of a business to prepare for and respond to unexpected disruptions. We've learned, and I've seen a lot of data through Fort McMurray and through a lot of the other wildfires and flooding and other things that have happened in this province, we've learned that well-prepared businesses have proven to fare much better through and after disaster if they've already considered the possible impacts to their business and developed strategies ahead of time for dealing with them. So this is the reality. Why is a business continuity plan important? Well, first of all, let me just say that most businesses don't have a business continuity plan, and everybody always delays doing it until after something like this happens. And you need to make time to do this. Because the reality of it is that emergencies and disasters are unavoidable, and they're happening more and more frequently in BC. And I already mentioned that. And if you look at climate change data, I have a larger report, larger presentation I do on this sort of stuff. And you can see actually, do you know that 8 of the 10 largest wildfire events have happened in the past 10 years, over 150 years. And so if you look at that, what we can see is that actually the frequency of a lot of these things are increasing dramatically, and a lot of that is through climate change. So this is going to only be happening more and more frequently as we go forward. And the key thing here is, although it's impossible to predict what will happen in the future, it is entirely possible to take steps to help reduce any negative impacts that the things will have. So what does this look like with a business continuity plan? It's really all about risk reduction. And we do that through mitigation and preparedness. So although a business continuity plan works through really a very simple process, there's lots of business continuity plan templates that are out there. Again, like I said, Community Futures has the workbook I made. They're making it available to people for free. I think the Chamber, the BC and National Chamber have a business continuity plan template. The province does. There's a lot of them out there. And so you can find them. They're for free. You can do this. And really, they all follow the same kind of process. You go through risk identification, and then you just implement strategies to reduce that risk. And I'll give you a small kind of taster snapshot of that. Like, what does that look like? Well, some of these strategies could be as simple as identifying in advance of an emergency situation alternative suppliers. If power is critical to your business, put in a power failure strategy. Maybe that's backup generators. Who knows? You get an opportunity to implement redundancies. Cloud storage and computing is like amazing through a lot of these situations, right? I mean, how many of us have a work computer and we have all of our data on there and we had to go into the office to like pull that data off? Most people have transitioned to the cloud, but if you were already on the cloud, you wouldn't have had to done that. And imagine a situation where you are actually evacuated from an area and you can't get to your office. You can't access your filing cabinet. You can't get to any of that information. What kind of a situation would you be in right now if that was the case? If you move all this onto the cloud, you can access it anywhere. And part of that is backing up data regularly. Again, basically built in with the cloud. But you can also talk to your staff about this. You can do cross-training, succession planning. There's lots of things. This is a very small example. There are thousands of strategies you can implement very easily in advance. So if something like this happens, you barely skip a beat. Can you imagine if when COVID landed, you had all of your information on the cloud, all your staff were cross-trained so they knew how to do each other's jobs. They all were familiar with an online platform, which you identified in advance to work remotely. Everyone had it on their computers. You had talked about what this would look like if something like this happened. And you had your backup suppliers, you had your crisis communication plan, so you immediately sent out messages to your clients, to your staff, to your suppliers, saying that you've got this. Can you imagine how much better you would have been through this process? Most of us don't have that. That's the reality of it. But why not? There's nothing stopping us from doing things like this in advance. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of open it up now to questions. I just hit you guys with a pile of information. I've really had to condense this down because there's just so much out there on this. But I want to kind of leave this slide up, and I want to, I'll leave this up, and I just want to make sure. It looked like I was also getting some chat messages. I'm sorry. Yeah, here we go. And I would like to, now it looks like we have a question from Jeremy right now, but I want to open it up for questions. We got something like 15 minutes, 20 minutes left. And so if anybody has anything in particular they want to ask about or go over, please feel free to do that. And Jeremy, you tell me, what's the best way to do this? Is it through the group chat text or?
Well, we can just open it up to questions.
So we'll do that.
Does
Okay,
anybody have a specific
perfect.
question that they'd like to ask? Everybody's unmuted, so if you want to remute yourself, that's fine. But if you have a question, let's just spit it out and see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's start with my question, because sometimes you just need a question to get you going. So one of the things I'm very
Yeah,
aware of,
for sure.
yeah, in this community, some organizations have lost significant revenues, whether they're nonprofits or indeed businesses. And so they're undertaking actions, marketing-wise, that can really be a bit challenging because they show sort of that desperation to regain traction. How do you suggest that businesses and organizations temper that need for the funding versus the long-term relationship build?
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that that is a key thing as we go through this. And this is an opportunity. I mean, businesses need to look at this as an opportunity to really build a lot of equity and goodwill in a community, and to look at reputational damage and reputational risk. And so you don't want to be advertising and pushing out their desperation, because the reality of it is that it's kind of a catch-22. But if you start to send out signals that you might be closing, what can happen a lot of times is if your staff get word of that, they start panicking, looking for other jobs. Your customers might start kind of thinking to themselves, ooh, maybe I should find a different place to go or to shop. And suppliers too, if they're paying attention. So you don't want to put desperation out there by any means. And I think that if you can bring attention to yourself through positive, like goodwill sort of stuff in the community, I think what I've seen in Kamloops and in other communities, but especially Kamloops, is if you're doing good stuff for the community, people come out and they support you. That's what happens. And so again, a lot of examples, again, if we look at strategies around preparedness and mitigation, some really good examples in this front might be that you might want to advertise the policy, a never raise prices policy. And it could be very simple, but it's literally you going out there and saying publicly, listen, we've made a commitment. We're not going to capitalize on other people's misfortune. We are not going to charge $5 for a bottle of water. We are not increasing our prices. We're making them available to products we sell that everybody needs. We are not going to capitalize on your misfortune. That could be a really good example. Another one is taking idle resources that you're not using right now and making them available to the community. So if we look at a lot of those breweries that were producing hand sanitizer, that would be a really good example of something there. And every business is different and unique. But if you put that out there and you have fixed costs, sunk costs that you're not going to be able to get out of anyways, you can advertise that way in the community, and it will draw a halo really around your business, and people will notice you and they'll be thinking, I want to support that business. Look what they're doing for the community. They're trying to help me out. I'm going to help them out. That would be my kind of recommendation.
Perfect. So other questions from the floor?
If I can, I just wanted to comment. I so agree with the goodwill and being social with the community and other businesses. I think it would also be great if maybe one business is selling a product. I'm going to use chocolates or something like that. And maybe they're not doing as well, but another business, maybe they could take that and put it with their, whatever it be, maybe pizza or whatever it might be, and they could merge their products together and sell. I think people just helping each other in business and community, I totally agree. People in Kamloops do not forget stuff like that. It'll be the first place that you'll go.
Totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else I'll throw out there when we talk about kind of crisis management and economic recovery through something like this, what can really help business owners is you need to take a step back, and you need to, right at the beginning, look at the situation and identify what are things that are in your control and what are things that are outside of your control. And things that are outside of your control, there's no point in putting energy and effort and worrying about that sort of stuff. That is what it is. What you need to do is you need to look at the things that are within your control, and you need to take action on them and do things. And so I think that a lot of people, like what I've seen in the past, and you got to be very careful with it, is that a lot of people are kind of sitting back and they're waiting for government to basically save them or bail them out or provide some sort of thing to kind of keep them afloat. You cannot rely on government to do that. You need to be proactive. Like, your business you're the one that's going to save your business. You're the one that's going to make it successful through this experience. Don't rely on other people to fix those issues for you. You need to be on top of the things that you can control and be working on it. You got to look at that government support as a bonus to help you through it. Don't sit back and wait for others to basically save your business, or for something to appear that's going to help you through this. And I do see that a lot, actually, through a lot of these disasters. So it's a fallacy. Don't do that. Be proactive. You're in charge of your own destiny.
Can you speak briefly to the concept of planning in the good times versus scrambling in the bad?
Absolutely. So this is the whole thing about business continuity planning. That, like, what I see, again, I've talked to like now thousands of businesses all over the province, from like the far corners, like all the way down to Vancouver. And I've stepped businesses through business continuity planning. The largest business have included Teck, the mining operation. I've brought a ski hill through this process, and I've done it all the way down to a entrepreneur, a young lady who is doing hairdressing out of her basement of her home. And it's the same for all of them. If you take the time now, when you're not in a crisis situation, to just put a little bit of thought and effort into where are your risk exposures, like where do you really need to focus your efforts, and then putting some strategies in place beforehand, you are going to be way better off when things do go sideways. And I've had the opportunity now where, since I've done these workshops, so I've done workshops where I brought people through the workbook. You don't need to be part of a workshop to do that. I've designed that workbook that's available for free through Community Futures Thompson Country. I've designed it so it can be self-guided. So you can just download that and go through it yourself. And I've talked to businesses, though, after I've done one of these workshops, and then they've had a wildfire, they've had flooding, and they've come back, and the reviews are consistent that everybody sees huge value in it. And a lot of people are sitting there and saying, thank God I had this. I can't believe I didn't think of doing this before. So the problem is that we don't like doing stuff like this. We don't like writing a business plan. We don't like doing a business continuity plan, right? It takes time. We're busy people. But I can tell you, if you do take the time right now, you are going to see it pay off in the future. And the other thing I should throw out there as well is, I've been talking about like a pandemic situation like COVID, wildfire, or flooding, because those are the more common things. But a good business continuity plan will actually help you against like cyber attack and cyber fraud. It'll help you against critical owner illness or critical employee loss. It'll help you through all sorts of like situations that you are definitely going to face as your business goes on. And think about it. How many of us are owner operators, or we're the executive director and we've got most of the information in our head? Imagine you suddenly woke up in the hospital and you had a massive heart attack, you survived, you're okay, but you've been in the hospital for 10 days. And could your business run right now? Does your staff have the information? Does your spouse, do other people have enough information available to them to have been able to continue operating your business during that time without a hiccup, or at least to bring some revenue in? And a lot of owner operators, the answer is no. Not even their spouse is able to do that. And so think about that. That sort of stuff happens all the time. And wouldn't it be amazing if you woke up and you're like, I don't have to worry about anything because I had the information available, the right information to the right people.